So, Brad, this morning I had a comic strip pop into my head that hasn't popped into my head in probably 40 years, maybe 35 years.
Oh, this must have been a good one. All right, let's hear it.
Well, by good, certainly big in my life. I don't know if it was a good comic strip, but the comic strip was called Screwgie.
Scroogie? As in Uncle Scroogie?
No, as in the comic strip you've never heard of called Scroogie.
Well, then clearly you're right. I've never heard of this.
So I grew up on the West Coast, and every summer we would go back to the East Coast and visit my grandparents. And my grandparents, God rest their souls, used to save the Sunday comics for me. And I would sit on the floor with 52 weeks worth of totally different comics than I got on the West Coast, right?
Oh my gosh, what a thoughtful thing.
Yeah, I loved it. And, until I'm saying this out loud, I maybe have never said externally how much that impacted my childhood, but I loved those comics that my parents would save for me. Anyway, long story short, there was a comic strip that ran largely on the East Coast called Scroogie in the late 70s, early 80s. Uh-huh. And this was here's the pitch for the comic strip.
Here's the pitch.
A can-do-no-right screwball pitcher named Scroogie works for I think it was the New York Pets, right? That was the baseball name, not the Mets, but the Pets. and it was written by Tug McGraw, the famous pitcher.
Oh my gosh.
He worked on the Mets and on the Phillies.
Yeah.
And then it was drawn by Michael Witte, I think, was the person. Anyway, long story short, perfectly pleasant, perfectly delightful comic strip. As a kid, I loved this comic strip. And
really?
No one has ever heard of it. No one ever read it, except for me, I guess.
Yeah.
But here's the part that I thought about this morning was the idea was that you would follow the team through their season, right? Like it would get very exciting and all the stuff would happen and, are they going to win? Are they going to make it? Oh, is Scroogie going to pitch and win the big game? But then the baseball season would end, right?
Yeah.
And then it would just go back to Scroogie, back, I don't remember exactly, but it was like him back on the farm where he grew up, and then just farm jokes for a couple of months. Because
really?
it was not the baseball season.
Oh my gosh.
I'm thinking as an adult, okay, fun idea that actually have a Major League Baseball player writing a comic strip about being a Major League Baseball player. That's fun.
Yeah.
But the pitch is, okay, so for X amount of months of the year, we're going to be having great fun with the comics and the baseball. And then the other 3, 4, 5 months of the year, it's just him on a farm. Just him on a farm.
Well, yeah, you've got April through October. So that's April, May, June, July, August, September, October. That's seven months. So almost little over half the year, you've got solid material. And then starting in November, you got nothing. In December, more nothing and a couple of Christmas jokes. And then January, you've got Happy New Year's and a month full of nothing. February, Valentine's Day, and Groundhog Day, maybe, and nothing. March, maybe you're starting to dream of spring training. In fact, I'd be tempted to start spring training a little early that year just to get him off of that freaking farm and get him back into a baseball stadium. And then finally, April, it's opening night, and bang, you got stuff to write about again.
Now you're back to the races. So this reminds me of Tolkien with Lord of the Rings. You remember that, for 8 months out of the year, Bilbo or Frodo and the crew would be heading towards Mordor, but then they would take that 5-month break during the story where they would just kind of sit around and kind of plant some fields. You remember that.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at here is, it's so weird to have a story where it's go, 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 action, adventure, and then it's well, here I am milking a cow again. And you're what? What is happening? I thought this was the baseball strip.
Frodo had supple wrists. No, wait, I don't know what's upsetting me more about this. The fact that you've got to come up with 5 months of something to put into this guy's life, or the fact that this was Tug McGraw, who was you got to remember, I worked for the Philadelphia Daily News for, 13, 14 years, and it was a sports newspaper. It ran around sports. Tug McGraw was a patron saint around there because in the 1980 World Series, the first time the Phillies won, he pitched that final pitch, the final strikeout, and we saw that news clip over and over and over again. I think he died in 2004. And so Tug McGraw was a big part of our reporting. Even after he died, there was also lots of mentions of the guy. And I never knew he did a comic strip. It never came up once. We knew that he gave birth to a country western singer, but we never knew he gave birth to a comic strip.
While you were talking, I just did a Wikipedia search on Tug McGraw, and just scrolls worth of entries about his baseball career, and literally one sentence about Scroogie the comic strip.
How long did it run?
Looks like maybe a couple years, 3 years, 4 years.
Oh, yeah. After that, the weight of that 5 months of nothing storytelling probably crushed him. But
I think an editor, put his hand on his shoulder and said, "Tug, there's only so much we can watch Scroogie oiling his glove."
No, what happened was the editor came out walking slowly, making sure not to step on the first base foul line, put his hand on his shoulder and said, "We're calling in the right-hander."
And you just see Charles Schultz trotting out to the mound.
Doodly-doo-dee-doo.
Put me in, coach. I'm ready to play. It's this new kid, right. Bert Brethen. He's ready to go.
We've got a young right-hander from the farm team coming up. He's got a comic strip about a penguin in a boarding house. And, hit the showers. We'll talk tomorrow.
Listen, Tug, you put in a great effort, buddy. Why don't you pass me that ball, okay? You pass me that ball. Anyway, I'm delighted that my childhood, though, was so informed by this comic strip that no one else has heard of.
Yeah.
To me, this was a big deal, this comic strip. I love the art style. It had a very early Garfield-esque, everything was rounded, everything was foreshortened. It was very well drawn looking back on it now. I have no idea about the writing. I bet there would be some troublesome stuff if I read it now, it being in the late 70s. But anyway, it's just amazing to me that had such a big impact on my life, and it was a comic strip no one else has heard of. Had you ever heard of that, Brad?
Never, ever. And it's really bugging me that I never heard of it, because it's the sort of thing, it's a sort of little tidbit that the Daily News would have pulled out, which tells me that they didn't know about it either.
Or maybe when he was on the Mets, they're like, no, we're not playing. We're not going to run this.
That might have been it, too, because he was in the Mets. He was on the Mets before he was in the Phillies. And maybe, this was the fact that he made it about the Mets and not the Phillies. They decided not to acknowledge it, which was also a very Daily News thing to do. But that's amazing. When I think about it, there's probably a couple dozen of those really small syndicated strips from that era, the 70s and the 80s, that were just big enough to be syndicated, but not big enough to be considered nationally syndicated. And probably each one of us has a small one like that we can point to that, nobody else has ever heard of. And of course, you're going to ask me what mine is, and I'm racking my brains. I can't think of one.
Yeah, other ones that spring into mind were, and this one was more national though. Broomhilda was always one that never really quite broke the big time, I would say.
Yeah.
But was kind of in every fourth paper in America.
Yeah. Oh, and it was such now talk about a comic that was beautifully drawn, especially for that that 1970s kind of feel for comics. It was a beautifully drawn comic. And in the 70s, it had a really sharp wit, too, because I had a few of those book collections that they'd put out, and it was very sharp writing.
Well, the basic idea was it was a witch, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't even remember the other characters. It was like a frog. It was like a
she
buzzard.
Had a buzzard named Gaylord and a furry character named Irwin. And that was pretty much it. And then there was also ancillary, occult type characters, but that was pretty much the main cast.
Good God. Okay, so I labeled this as a not very big comic from the 70s, right? Guess how many frickin' Broomhilda book collections there were, Brad?
Oh, I'll bet you there was a lot. How many? More than 24.
Yep, you'd be right. It looks like at least 25 to 30 Broomhilda collections. Yeah. Good God, Broomhilda. Somebody was buying a third house off of Broomhilda. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah. I wonder, now, see, we shouldn't be doing this live, but I'll bet you that guy also launched a couple second strips, because once you got up into those numbers, you were launching satellite strips and stuff and building your own empire, and I bet you he was in that category.
Yeah, let's see. Wow, there's an Al Cap connection to Broomhilda. That's interesting. So far, it looks like he only wrote Broomhilda.
Oh, that's too bad.
Well, couldn't buy that fourth house then. Just had to stick with 3.
He'll have to satisfy himself with the small-sized yacht.
Yeah, exactly. Well, on that note, I am going to say hello, everybody, and welcome to Comic Lab, the show about making comics.
And making a living from comics. I'm Brad Geiger, editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Inc.
And I'm his friend Dave Kellett, cartoonist of Drive and Sheldon and co-director of Stripped.
And this week's Hour of Comics Advice is made possible by your support at patreon.com/comiclab. So Dave, let's talk comics.
Let's talk comics, my friend, and let's jump right in. We have a question from Brian Cox, one of our Patreon supporters, and he has a question for you and I specifically, Brad. And it goes,
good.
Dave and Brad, could you both please talk about your current comic creation process from start to finish? For example, do you get an idea on a sticky note and then you write that in a word processor and then you draw it in Photoshop? How do you do it? Feel free to elaborate per strip, per page, per half page, daily process, or weekly process. We love this stuff. Brad Geiger, I'm actually kind of curious to hear how you work these days. I know how you worked a few years ago, but I imagine you have evolved. So give me the scoop. How do you do it?
Well, the most time-consuming and the most labor-intensive part is writing, really. And I think that's the most important part. So I've got sketchbooks upon sketchbooks, and I buy them, the blank pages without lines, and I fill those sketchbooks instead of sketches with writing. And I like to do what I call a cascading brainstorming form of writing, where mentally I'll divide those pages into vertical columns, and I'll start writing vertically until I get stuck. Like I'll start writing down the center of the page until I get stuck. And then when I get stuck, I'll back up a few steps and I'll branch off either to the left or to the right from one of those steps, take a turn, make something different happen, and see if that gets me unstuck. And then I'll keep doing that, finding different ways to branch out until I find a path that is the funniest path.
Right.
And my one rule about this is until I've really decided where I'm going to go, I don't cross anything out, because something that was an element of a stuck path might be part that I go back, reroute, and come back to at another time. So there's no story element that's ruled out until the very end. But I just kind of keep going back and retracing my path, or going all the way to square one and saying, okay, I started from a bad place. I'm not going to start there. I'm not going to have him in the kitchen. He's going to be on the patio. Okay, maybe funny things happen on the patio. Now patio, go. And or maybe I start from a different point in time, or maybe I'll just change the characters. It's like, okay, the story isn't with these characters. The story is someplace else, and it's going to lead into those characters. So many times I've gotten a much better storytelling when I get kind of focused on what's happening between two characters. And it's like, oh, I know what needs to happen down the road, but in the middle, it's not happening here. And what happens is many times a change of scenery is exactly what it takes. I'll switch that out and be commenting on that central action, not from the characters, but from an outsider's point of view. I've done this a couple times with the police dispatchers because I do supervillains, right?
Yeah, I love that. I love that angle that you do. Yeah.
And instead of following those supervillains, all of a sudden I'll go over and have the police dispatchers talking about it. And then that gets me to some pretty funny places, and then I can bring it back. But that's really the process that I've found works best for me, is a cascade, what I call a cascading brainstorming kind of deal, where I just continually, almost like you're trying to get your car out of a snowbank, right? If you've ever been in a snowbank, you know that the thing not to do is to put your foot on the gas and to rev your engine and spin the wheels. That's going to turn that snow into ice, and you're never going to get traction.
I just want to say for the record that as a Los Angelino, I had no idea that was the case.
Well,
I've never, wouldn't have known any of that.
So every winter, and we've been getting such little amounts of snow here in Philadelphia that I don't get the chance to do it. But every now and again, the snow piles up enough in winter, maybe once a year or so now. that we get enough snow that I get to bring out my Midwestern roots, and I'll see somebody snuck in the snow, and they've got their gas right down to the floorboard, and they're spinning their wheels. And it's my superpower. I can get people out of snowbanks. And it's so great. It's like this wonderful thing to be able to do, to step out into the road. And my wife always, when she sees somebody stuck in a snowdrift, she's like, all right, well, I'm just going to go to this coffee shop. You catch up with me later because I'm already on my way. I've got my hands out. All right, stop what you're doing. Stop, you're doing it all wrong. Roll your window down. We're going to get you out.
Hold on. Here comes a Michiganer. I'm going to solve this problem. Oh, gosh.
And I'm like, all right, we're going to listen. I roll down your window. Yeah, I'm from Michigan. It's all right. No, it's not.
I love that idea. You're in good hands, ma'am. I'm from Michigan.
You're in good mittens. I'm from Michigan is the more appropriate way to say. But it's like, no, this isn't a carjacking. We're just going to get you out of this snowdrift. All right. And what you do is you rock the car back and forth.
All right. We don't need to go 10 minutes.
No.
Do it.
No. Because this comes back to writing. That's what I'm doing in the writing too, is I'm rocking that story.
I see.
Back and forth. You don't creatively put your foot to the bottom of the gas pedal and rev your engine and spin your wheels. When you find that you're spinning your wheels as a storyteller, that's telling you, okay, you're not getting any place. It's time to rock this car back and forth. And that's what I'm doing. Holy
crap, that was masterful, Brad. The fact that you brought getting a car out of the snow back to story writing.
Right. I was going, it's so rare that I've got a cogent thought that it catches people by surprise. But yeah, that's where I was going with that whole metaphor, is that you got to rock yourself out of those creative snowdrifts, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I do in the writing. After I get a solid storyline, I do try to let it sit for at least 24 hours so I can come back and really judge a little bit more clearly if I wasn't letting myself off the hook, or whether there's really something funny there. And then I divide my pages up into half pages. I'll post a half page Tuesday and a half page on Thursday. And usually it works out well and it usually works out to that half page, usually clocking in at about 7 panels. I don't like my gutters to line up. So it's got to be an even number and then an odd number, and then an even number and an odd number.
That's interesting. I don't like my gutters to line up either. I think the flow is better visually.
Yeah. I avoid that. It's uncomfortable to me. Well, what happens is, if you're going to do it like in The Watchmen, if you're going to do that, you've got to stick to a really solid grid. And it's always, if you're going to line up gutters, they all got to line up.
That is so funny that you should mention The Watchmen, because I literally have my hand on a copy of The Watchmen right now, thinking of that exact thought. That the only place I think that does it well, where the panels are consistent, is The Watchmen. But because he's super locked into that your eye knows to follow that. Otherwise, keeping them offset lets your eye know, no, don't cheat down. Keep it up on this line. Don't look down below this.
That's exactly what it does.
Anyway, here's what I think we should do, because I think this will keep it interesting. Let's go back and forth through the different stages, and we'll talk about how, like, you'll do ideation, I'll do ideation. You'll do penciling, I'll do penciling. You want to do that?
All right. So I'm just about to hand off into the penciling process. So you go into your ideation process.
Okay. So like you, I actually agree with Brad wholeheartedly that handwriting out ideas gets you to a better result.
Oh, yes.
And I will say that, though, by quickly following up, that I very often don't do it. But I will agree with Brad. No, I'll tell you why. I will agree with Brad that handwriting, and Brad hit on part of the reason why I like to do it. And one of the reasons why I like to handwrite out ideas is that any scratch outs, any circles and arrows, any of that stuff is captured on the page. Whereas an email or a digital device, you're deleting, and you lose it. Yeah. And sometimes the thing that you scratched out, that first iteration of a setup or a punchline or a delivery, is actually better than the 9th iteration that you rewrote. And you're like, wait, no, I had something better at first. And sometimes just changing around panel 3 means you can re-slot in what you wrote the first time. So doing it by hand, for me, Also, because we're visual people as cartoonists, you can move things around with circles, squares, arrows, crossouts, all that sort of stuff. And the energy of what you're writing can also be transmitted. So you can change a font when handwriting in seconds, whereas when you're doing a word processor, you have to go up and hit bold, font size 14, change the
Yes.
color. Whereas in handwriting, you can do it, instantaneously. So,
And it's quicker. It's a quicker, more kinetic process where writing is a linear process. And I think if you use a word processor for writing, you trap yourself into linear thinking because you can only go one direction. You can only go down.
Yes.
And when you're handwriting, it's kinetic. You're going all over the place.
And I would love to be able to show people, and maybe I'll put one up on Patreon. I would love to be able to show people the best Drive comics that I draw. There are individualized word bubbles all over the page being scratched out, circled, brought over to here. You know what I mean, Brad? It looks like a chaotic mess, but it makes sense to me because I remember the process of creation. I remember which came first. I remember which one's going to slot in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just sort of hand number the panels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what I do is if it's really chaotic on the page, 1A is the first person talking in panel 1. 1B is the second person talking in panel 1, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That way, if the voice bubbles are all over the page and scratched out and circled and crossed out and arrowed, I can still track it mentally with the 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, 2B, 2C, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's how I keep track of that. But I will say this. So having said all of that I also write with a word processor a fair amount when I'm out on the road or out and about. And I don't carry a little pocket carryable notebook anymore like I used to, like a Moleskine, just because I forget it half the time. My goal in life is to have one thing I have to grab when I walk out the door, and that's my phone or my keys or whatever it is, okay? So my phone often becomes my idea capturing device. And the way that I do it is no matter what the comic idea is, I always make my subject heading idea, and I email it to myself.
Mm-hmm.
And you may say, well, now why don't you put it in some sort of idea capturing advice, like a wonder list or some sort of checklist or something like that? And
like
for me,
Things, that app.
Right, like I did use Things briefly, and I just kept finding that emailing it to myself, I could retrieve it from no matter what device in my life I was on, iPad, iPhone, computer. And then also there was something nice about having it imminently searchable and past ideas searchable. So anyway, I always header the subject header idea, and then specifically if it's a Drive idea, I will header it Drive idea, and that's how I write them. But I will say this: I continually go back when I'm in the studio to a large piece of blank, lineless white paper to write the best Sheldons and Drives. Because the energy is better, the flow is better, the ideation process is better than writing it by word processor. So I will agree with Brad on that.
Can I put a little side note in here?
Sure.
I gave myself a little Christmas present this past week. I found I wanted to try it, and it addresses exactly what you're talking about. And so what it was, I got a little Christmas money to spend. So I was like, no, it's always fun to get Christmas money because it's like, you can blow it on something that you wouldn't have normally spent on yourself.
You know what I love about you saying Christmas money? Is I just want to say to you, Brad, you're a grown-ass man. You don't have to wait for somebody to give you Christmas money.
Well, you kind of do. As a dad, particularly, you're always feeling guilty about spending money on yourself.
That is eminently true. I just think it's cute that you're like, oh, Grandma gave me $10. I'm going down to get me some gum and some comics. Oh, boy, oh, boy.
Oh, and I get giddy over getting Christmas money. It's like, I can do anything I want with this,
I just love the idea of an adult. Oh boy, I got some Christmas money. Oh boy, here we go.
So listen, I splurged on something that you might really be interested in.
Okay, what's that?
It's called Sketch Wallet. And it popped up. Strangely enough, this came up. The reason it even came on my radar is because they had an Instagram account, and either I've stumbled into them, or they followed me and I followed them. Or see, how Instagram works. It's all over the map. And I see this thing called Sketch Wallet, and it's a little about 3.5 by 5-inch wallet when it's folded, and it's got a sketchbook inside of it, a bunch of folders for your credit cards, a little holder for a little golf pencil type sized pencil, and a little input for your dollar bills and stuff. And I thought, you know what? They always say you're not supposed to carry your wallet around in your back pocket because it throws off how you sit and it makes your spine crooked. And like everybody else, I've got this huge freaking wallet, with all of my insurance cards and credit cards and all this stuff you got to carry around. And so I thought, it'd be kind of neat to have that in my front pocket anyway. And so I've got a sketch wallet, and I just got it a couple weeks ago. And it's nice having something in your wallet that you can take out, spur of the moment, write down a couple ideas on, do some sketching if you like to do that and stuff like that. But it's been a real joy to have, and it kind of addresses that whole thing about you feeling like you have to carry around a separate sketchbook. With this, it's all your wallet, and you're going to be grabbing your wallet with you when you go out of the house anyway, because it's got your driver's license and your credit cards, and it's so far I'm really liking it. And this isn't, I don't get any money for endorsements on this or anything else, so it's an honest, genuine thing. I'm really enjoying my sketch wallet.
So I like that idea. I don't know that I could make that leap to that thing, though. I mean, I exclusively keep my wallet in my back pocket, and I feel like that pencil would absolutely jab me in the ass at some point.
Well, no, it's a small little. It's like a golf pencil. You know when you play putt golf and they give you that little pencil.
I like the idea that there's a pencil sticking out of my cheek, and you're like, "Well, it's only a golf pencil, David."
It's sideways. It's sideways. It's not downways. It's not going to poke you. It's sideways.
I mean, it's not a full-size pencil sticking out of your ass cheek, David. It's only a golf pencil. Oh, thanks, Brad. That's helpful. I don't know why you're complaining.
It's just a little bit. What are you worried about?
No, but I do. Okay. So theoretically, I like that idea, and I'm interested in seeing it when when I next see you. But I'm not sure. Anyway, I'm glad that you have found something that works for you, because in the brief period of my life where I did carry around a Moleskine, there's a surprisingly large amount of times in your life where you do have 5 minutes to sketch or 10 minutes to ideate, and a Moleskine is really helpful for just getting down scribbles.
Yeah.
So I haven't done it in 10 to 15 years, but I am envious of you that you have a new way of doing it that way. That's good. So let's move on to penciling. So when you're even, like, you've got your idea, you've got your script, you've worked through the flow, the vertical flow that you've talked about with the different columns, and you landed on a script that works for you. How do you then type directly into, you use Manga Studio, right? Or whatever it's called.
Yeah, I use CS Paint, which used to be Manga Studio. But I've used CS Paint, and I will first start with putting the word balloons in. So, and I keep those on a separate layer. Actually, I keep those on a layer that's on top, the topmost layer, even over top of my frames. So I don't do the word balloons inside of the panels. I float those over top, because more often than not, I'm going to be breaking those panel borders anyway. Right. And I want them to float, and I want them to float in different ways. There's 3 or 4 different ways you can make that panel and that word balloon interact. And for me, keeping them on the topmost banner, the topmost layer, it gives me the most options with the least amount of fuss. So I'll go through, put all the word balloons in, and kind of position them the way I think they're going to be, but that's all written in water anyway. They're going to move 100 times as I'm penciling anyway. But I'll just position them in an arbitrary spot, where giving it my best guess. And then I'll go into doing the sketching. Now, the word balloons are in a folder at the very topmost layer. Sketching is at the bottom-most layer, and all of my I've got a folder. And in CS Paint, you can make that folder a draft layer, okay? Which means that it won't export when you're done with it. Those will all disappear when you're exporting your final art. And any layer that gets put into that folder automatically is a draft layer, and it's going to disappear when you export the final art.
Right.
So I've got a sketch folder with a few layers already started that have it set up so that their presentation color is a color instead of black. In other words, if I have that layer activated and I start drawing in it, the line is going to be blue or purple or red. and I've got maybe 6 of those layers, so I can do a little penciling in blue and then switch layers and pencil somebody else in purple, and that helps so I can move those 2 around independently. I can resize them, I can reshape them, I can cut them right out and put them in another place in another page. It makes it a lot easier when you're moving these things around. And I'll do all of that work. By the time I'm done, I might have a couple of dozen different layers in that sketch folder, all of maybe different penciling layers with different colors, and also like photos that I brought in for reference and stuff like that. Those all go in there so that I'm keeping all that stuff separate. And so I don't ever have to worry about one of those things popping up in final art.
Right.
And so then that's the penciling process for me. How do you do Drive and Sheldon differently?
Yeah, I do them very differently. And so this might take a second for me to describe the two, but I'll go fast. So Sheldon, the final product, for those that don't know, is still archival ink on Bristol, acid-free Bristol vellum paper, right? So that's where we're going to end up here. But I mentioned that because I start very differently. I used to pencil right on the vellum paper and letter using a special lettering guide that I had with a light box. I no longer do that because when I was filming Stripped, one of the cartoonists that whose process I really liked was Meredith Gran, and another one was, I think it was Jake Parker, but this was separately from filming Stripped, where both of them would do their drawing and their layouts and their text layouts digitally, move things around, resize as needed, flip things around horizontal, vertically, however they needed to do it, get everything fitting in the panel, print that out, and then light box that and draw on the paper.
Oh, what a great idea.
Yeah, and it has a lot of advantages, one of it being the resizing of a character. I mean, have you ever done this, Brad, where you pencil out a character and you're like, oh, darn it, that's about 15% too big. I need to redraw the whole thing. But when you do it digitally, obviously, you just drag and reduce, and it could not be easier to move things around and shrink it and move it. And so there's a million advantages to penciling digitally. And so I just have an Epson printer in my office here in the studio that can print onto 11 by 17 paper, and I print that out. I throw it on my light box on my desk. I tape down the Bristol vellum to it, and then I ink right away. And so for me, for Sheldon, the lettering application and the sketching is often the longest part of the process because I'm trying to get it right there so that by the time I'm inking, it can be a phone call or music in the background and just happily drawing away. Like the inking to me is the most fun. So I try to put the penciling, have that do all the heavy lifting, and then I print it out and sketch over it. Now with Drive, my process is actually surprisingly like Brad's. I will put down my lettering first because that will dictate how big a panel it has to be, how much headroom I have, for lack of a better phrase, for the characters. And so you get better as you go, and Brad and I are on more than 2 decades now, and you just kind of eyeball it, and you go, all right, this panel's going to be about this big, this panel's going to be about this big. And so like Brad, it's like writing with water because those word balloons are still going to change 1,000 times as I'm drawing. But I get those down. I lay out the lettering in roughly a bubble shape, and we've talked about that elsewhere, where you want to have a consistent paneling border all around or negative space all around the lettering. And then on a separate layer below the line or the lettering, I have the voice bubbles. And for Drive, I have those with a tiny drop shadow because I like to float my voice bubbles above the panel so they will break the panel format. I don't think I have to pull up an evil ink, but you keep them all inside the panel. Is that right, Brad?
For the most part, yeah. I mean, they break the border, but they never float above.
Right. So for Drive, and it's just an aesthetic thing. For Drive, they float above constantly the panels, and so they move about. And so I put a tiny 10% transparency drop shadow on those voice bubbles. And then below that will go, the next layer down will be line art. The next layer below that will be the panels. And then I think below the panels is coloring, and then below the coloring is just a pure white and copyright symbols and stuff.
Yeah.
And so anyway, for Drive, what's great is working digitally has a million advantages. So the penciling of Drive is very fun. And like Sheldon, you can do a lot of quick experimentation digitally and go, nope, 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 delete, delete, delete. And then you're back to square one or moving things around and resizing. So, okay, so now, Brad, now that we've both talked about penciling, what is the next stage for you in Evil Ink?
For me, it's inking, and I feel the same way you do about inking. In fact, we said in an earlier show, inking I think is the only part that I should be live streaming, because the other parts, when I try to let people into the process, it always gets to be detrimental to the overall experience. But inking is a joy, and all the hard work has been done, and now it's just making it look nice. Now it's just getting good lines down and getting good art. And if you've done a decent job of penciling, that's a joy. So
Right.
I'm right there the same with you. In terms of technical aspects, going back to CS Paint, in the same way that I like to have my word balloons pop outside of panels, I also like to kind of honor that Jack Kirby aesthetic, and I like to have arms and legs and heads and laser beams jutting outside of the panel as well. And to do that, there's a number of different ways. I saw somebody post like a 5 or 6 step process that you can do this in Clip Studio Paint. They've got something built in, but you click this and you click that, and then you draw a shape around the thing that's supposed to be jutting out, and it's a whole lot of trouble. I do it with 2 layers. I call them floater layers, floater lines and floater blockers. And those are in fact, those are on top of even the word balloons, because often the floaters are going to pop over top of the word balloons as well.
Oh man, can we use another word besides floaters though, just as a request?
Floaters? Well, that's the term I use. If you open up any of my CS Paint documents, it'll say floater. What do you want it to say?
Just not floaters. Just find a different word for your work.
It floats.
Oh boy, this is a real floater over here. Oh boy.
I never thought of it that way. Well, I just think that they float over top of everything else. like happy little clouds that float. You wouldn't think anything bad about a happy little floating cloud.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, let's reframe it as clouds. That's great.
Okay, cloud. So I've got these 2 layers, and if I need something that pops out, often I'll draw it, and I'll just keep on drawing it, and then I will draw a magic wand, or I'll select it, cut it, and then paste it onto that layer at the top. And so now it's floating on top of the layer, on the floater line art layer. I'll go behind that, color that in with white so that it blocks out the panel. That's the floater blocker. And now that shape is popping out of the panel. And that's something I should probably, for our Patreon backers, that's a lot easier to see than it is to explain. So I'll post a little step-by-step tutorial.
Yeah, I think everyone's going to want to see your floaters, Brad. That's great. That's
You get to see Brad's floaters. That does sound horrible. I need a new term. But yeah, that's the real standout in how I ink. And then I'll take it all the way through, because it's a very, for me at least, it's very easy slide in from there, because then I export it as a Photoshop document, send it to the amazing and super skillful Alex Heberling, who colors it, and she does what she does would take an entire podcast to explain further. But then somehow it appears in my Dropbox folder, all beautiful and everything, and I get to post it for my readers.
That's great. Well, one thing before I jump into my last stages of my process, I should mention there was another trick that I picked up from, I think it was Scott Kurtz about 5-6 years ago, which all the layers that Brad and I have described with voice bubbles, panels, line art, color, text, one thing that Scott did that I was like, that's a brilliant idea, I'm going to steal that, is he has different colors for each of those overall foldered layers.
Yeah.
So you don't just make layers for everything, you make folders. And so one folder is voice bubbles, one folder is line art, one folder is color. And inside those folders, there can be multiple layers, but the folder is applied a color in Photoshop, and I think CS Paint can do this too, right, Brad? Where
if that's the case, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Well, then,
but that doesn't mean that it's not so. It just might be that I'm ignorant to it.
Well, I'll just speak then to Photoshop, what I use. divvying them up by color is an immediate and clear read for your eyes. So you go, where was that layer? And you go, all right, well, it's definitely in the line art. So let's go to the red folder and all the red layers that are in that folder, and then you find what you want to do.
Yeah.
And unlike a lot of people, I keep really assiduous tracking of my layers, so I will name everything. I know some people get in there and it's like layer 42, layer 43, layer 44, and I really name everything. So it just makes my process easier. But
let me ask you this: Do you use auto select?
Remind me. Sometimes I use.
So here's the deal. Here's when I stopped naming all my layers. Is when it was pointed out to me very politely that you can have auto select activated, and it's in the upper left-hand corner of your Photoshop screen. And what happens then is that you don't have to find a layer. If you have auto select selected, you take your cursor, you click on that line, and it's going to automatically take you to the layer that line is a part of.
Oh yeah. But so here's my one. By the way, that's a great feature and well worth sharing.
Yeah.
But there are occasional layers where you literally have to select down to the pixel level to know which layer you're trying to grab, you know?
Yes, that's true.
If it's a gradient or a cloud look or a brush that is really a wet or a dry brush look, sometimes it's hard to select that layer. Anyway, but yeah, that's a great tip from Brad. And then like Brad, I will ink, and that's to me the most fun part of the process. For Sheldon, that's when it is locked in stone. Like if I mess up in Sheldon, which I rarely do in the inking stage, but when I do, I get so mad because I like my originals to be pristine and super frameable because I sell them. And so once a year, twice a year, I will F up significantly enough where I have to do a paste over or something like that.
Yeah.
And boy, am I mad at myself if that happens. But the rest of the time, it's fine. And they have very different feels. If you look at a Sheldon or a Drive, Sheldon is more loosey-goosey and is more has more of an frenetic energy.
Yeah.
Just because I still use pen and brushes to draw it. Whereas Drive has a little bit more of a clean look. And I think that's just because in digital, it caters to having a little bit of an OCD, like I want this to be perfect feel, you know, Brad?
Right.
And so I do think I overcorrect with Drive and I make the lines too clean and too pretty, whereas Sheldon has a little bit better energy. But again, both of it subjective. I could change it at any time, but that's just the final result. And then, like Brad, both of them, when I finish Sheldon, that one gets scanned in and Beth colors it. And then when Drive is done with the line art, I pass that over across the studio in Dropbox to Beth, and she colors that one. And then they both go online, and that's our process.
That's fantastic. Hey, if you're listening while you work, take a minute and stand and stretch.
And while you're doing that, Brad and I are going to tell you why you should join us on Patreon.
Yeah, because, when you do, you'll get hours and hours of podcasts that we've recorded just for backers.
And an exclusive Patreon post that go even deeper on the Comic Lab topics.
And access to our exclusive Discord server, a thriving community of professional cartoonists.
So you can support the show you love and get tons of actionable resources for your own cartooning.
And listen, if you can't swing a pledge this month, no worries.
You can still support the show by rating us wherever you get podcasts.
Leave us a 5-star review and a few kind words.
And that, along with mentions on social media, is incredibly helpful.
And now, let's talk comics.
So, Brad, I wanted to switch directions now and talk about something that I think is worth doing from the overall podcast standpoint, which is sometimes I feel like I personally speak from too egotistical a standpoint with like a survivor's ego in that like the way I do it is the way to do it and there's no other way. And I want to talk from a point of humility, actually, which is that there have been 2 or 3 times in my 20-year career online where I just couldn't keep it together. There was either health stuff going on in the family or big career things going on in the family or a move or another bigger project that was keeping me from cartooning. And it was all I could do in my life and in my career to just keep my head above water. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where, because I sometimes I feel like I'm like, everything's going great for Dave Keller, blah, 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 blah. Whereas I want to remind people that there are a lot of times in life where it's totally fine to just keep your head above water and just do what you can. And so I want to talk about, if it's okay with you, a phrase which is, if something is worth doing, it's worth doing half-ass. Um, and here's what I mean by that. When kids were born, when
Hmm.
there were some health crises in the family, when houses were being moved, or when the editing was being done in those last months of stripped production or post production, um, it was all I could do to get a Sheldon out a week or a drive out every couple weeks. And um, I got sad. I got real sad because,
Hmm.
you want to be able to producing at the top of your game. But it was okay over the long term of my career that all I could do was get out that one or two Sheldons or those one or two drives, because it was still worth doing. It was just going to take me a little bit longer to get there.
Yeah.
And so if something was worth doing, it was still worth doing half-assed. It's better to do something than to give up entirely. And I wanted to get your thoughts about that. Have you had moments like that in your career?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, in the same way that, we both kind of, I think, take a look back over our career at this point, because it's like we're at that point in life where you start to do those sorts of things. And that's why, especially when this podcast started, one of my big rallying cries that I came back to time and time again was to tell, especially younger cartoonists, that they did not have to do that daily update. That webcomics publishing had in fact changed, and doing that daily update was not as a big of a benefit as it was for us back in 2002, where it was very, very important to do that.
Right.
And part of that is to go to that same type of thing that you're saying. There's so many cartoonists who probably, and you see it time and time again, where they go, you'll see a post that says, I couldn't post a comic today because I was sick, or I couldn't post a comic today because I had to work late last night. I would give you strong advice. Number one, never to make a post like that. Never call attention to a quote unquote failing. Okay? Because chances are people, especially in today's internet, they're so busy getting bombarded with content, they didn't notice that you didn't post a comic today until you drew their attention to it. So,
Right.
first
Right.
things first, never ever make a post like that says, well, there's no comic today and here's why, blah, blah, blah. I don't think you need to do that. And at the same time, you need to let yourself off the hook and say it's okay that there's not a comic today. There might not be a comic this week. And that's okay, because the internet will be there next week. Your readers will be there next week. And if you're posting stuff that is really good, they're not going to matter. It's not going to matter that you missed a week or that you didn't post a day here and there. If you're posting good stuff, they'll love you just as much as they did on the day before you had that gap. And if your stuff isn't good, posting that not so great, that mediocre comic is the only way you're going to get to the point where you're doing good comics. So there's value in that too.
Right.
So no, I'd say let yourself off the hook. It's okay. It's okay to miss an update day. It's okay that life gets in the way. We all know this, and there's not a one of us, no matter how closely you look and see, oh, they've never missed an update. This has never happened. That's never. Nah, everybody deals with this stuff in one way or another. And and it's okay. It's okay to not post. It's okay to miss it. It's okay. By the way, here's another thing. It's okay to take a little time for self-care and say, you know what? I'm just not feeling it this week. I'm going to go do something else. I'm going to go look at flowers. I'm going to go take long walks. I'm going to go get the fire back. Taking a little time for self-care, especially, Dave, did you read all this stuff about burnout? That's becoming a really big topic right now, burnout.
Yeah, yeah. And I have had that moments in my career too, where you get this feeling like it has to be all or nothing. Like if you're not producing 7 days a week and they're not all firing on all pistons, then you're a little bit failing. And
Yeah,
I've had that feeling too.
yeah.
And I want to tell you from a place of more experience that it's okay to be in the middle. And that's what I mean by half-ass. It doesn't have to be nothing where you have to quit and walk away and give up comics. It's okay to say, like, I'm going to do what I can do, and it's going to be at a quality level that I can manage, and that's okay.
Yep.
And to Brad's point, I just want to direct your attention to like Perry Bible Fellowship, or sometimes Achewood, or when she was doing it, Hark a Vagrant, where sometimes there were huge gaps in all three of those when their update schedules. But I think there was wisdom in not necessarily calling attention to it and just putting them up when they came up. And people would be, because there's a million things online, people weren't going, hey, it's been 6 months. They're like, I'm happy to read this other thing over here in the meantime. Oh, you're back. Great. All right, I'm going to read that. You know?
Absolutely. Isn't it always the case, though? We always torture ourselves way more than people are willing to torture us outwardly. In other words, when you're in a place like that, you're imagining all those readers saying, oh, where's Brad? There's no evil ink today. Where's Brad? What's Brad doing? I'm going to start reading somebody else because Brad's not here. This Brad, you torture yourself mentally because you're imagining all this. Chances are what's actually happening is 90% of them are so busy with their own lives, they didn't notice there wasn't an evil ink today.
Right.
And the 10% that did notice shrugged and said, well, I'll check back later. I can't wait till the next one comes up because we're at a good place in the storyline. This will be good. I can't wait. Nine chances out of 10, it's either complete disregard, which has its own barbs to deal with, or it's okay. It's not here right now. I'll check back later.
Yeah, and it's funny how much of life is a shrug. Like, you think people are going to be like, damn you, Brad Geiger.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. And most people are like, like literally it's like, all right, I'll check back in a little bit. Like, whenever they move back a movie release, there's some people that get so upset about it. Like, blah, blah, and my reaction is just like, all right, I'll see it in May then. It's not going out till May, I'll see it in May.
I'm sure there'll be something for me to watch in April, and then that'll be something to do in May.
Yeah, it's not like we're not at peak TV, so I think they'll be fine. But I just want to give everybody a little permission to be balancing their life as best they can, and to know that is okay.
Yeah.
Because I want to counterbalance that, because I sometimes catch myself, if I listen back, that I just want to always fight the idea that the only way to do a career is Brad and my way of doing a career, and the only way to do it is constantly producing, never stop selling, that kind of thing. And that's not the case. The case is that life happens. There are ebbs and flows in life, and there are peaks and valleys of creativity and of energy levels for a project. And it's okay if you can do what you can do, and that's it. You don't have to be producing at a superhuman level. And at the same time, I really don't want you to be quitting. If you can produce only at a third of the pace that you want to be, or a tenth of the pace that you want to be, that is okay. And it is still making forward progress, as Brad said, to the next cartoon, the better cartoon, the best cartoon you can make down the road. So even if it's not there right now, it will be. Just don't give up entirely.
Right. Remember, time is a continuum.
Oh, what a phrase that we've learned. What a phrase that we have all learned. Life is not episodic, my friends. Time is a continuum.
That's right.
I want like a cowbell when that goes off. Like Brad just goes, ladies and gentlemen, time is a continuum.
Where was that sound effect when we were talking about Screwgie, for crying out loud?
Holy crap, why didn't I use that for Scroogie?
If you listen back, I had to do the little doodly doot doot myself.
Oh, Brad, like a chump, you had to do your own doodly dooty doo.
You don't want me over here doodly doot dooting myself.
Nobody wants to see Brad doodly dooting himself. That's high school all over again.
Well, listen, I got one more thing that we should doodly doot to do, and that's go to a new topic.
All right, let's do it, my friend.
All right, let's doodly doot to do it. Tyler Mann writes, I just finished a Kickstarter, and I'm already thinking ahead to my next project. Do you think having two Kickstarters a few months apart looks bad to readers or supporters? That sent in by one of our $5 Patreon backers, and I ask you, Dave, how soon is too soon?
Well, okay, so I have two thoughts on this. One is, and this is no more than subjective, I feel like, roughly speaking, you could get away with one about every 6 months. That's totally subjective, has no basis in science. That's my guess. In terms of Brad's ratio of creative content you put out versus the asks that you make on the creative content, right? And so that's a rough guess, the 6 months. But I think another way to look at this is that you damn well better be sure that the previous Kickstarter that you did is either in the process of fulfilling or has already fulfilled before you go back out again, hat in hand. That's a tricky moment to be in.
Yeah.
And I've had that happen once where another Kickstarter is launching and people are like, wait a minute, though. I didn't get the previous one yet. And you're like, no, that's coming. It's coming. It's 2 weeks away. That'll be shipping out. So that's my basic advice is just make sure the previous one is done or so close to being done that, boy, people can smell it being in their mailbox. Brad, what are your thoughts? How would you advise on this?
This is going to be a short topic because I co-sign 110% with both things that you were going to say. I agree with you completely. Is that you can have them a little bit close up together, but you better believe that before you launch that second one, you got to be airtight on the first one.
Well, and then what are your thoughts, Brad? Because you always have a good way of balancing out your concept of the 3 C's. And how does that play into Kickstarter launching? Why don't you real quick recap your concept of the 3 C's and then talk about how that would relate to Kickstarters multiple times in a year?
Boy, that's a good... well, the 3 C's I usually talk about in terms of social media. And that's content, commercial, and curation, where you put out a certain amount of content, that's your own stuff, a certain amount of commercial, where that's you asking people either to buy a book or tell them that you can support you on Patreon. And then curation is where you're posting other people's stuff. And other than the fact that the Kickstarter announcement would fall under commercial, I don't think that the 3 C's would preclude you from doing a Kickstarter relatively soon, like a couple months after your previous one, as long as you're balancing out with the other stuff. But no, I think I keep coming back to that idea that I would give your readers a little rest, like at least a month, if not a couple months, between Kickstarters, and then I would make sure that when you do have that other Kickstarter ready to go, it fits nicely inside the 3 C's that you've got planned for your upcoming social media posts.
Well, one of the reasons why I brought up your concept of the 3 C's is not just that I want to talk about social media, but I think this has applications for your broader career online, which is that before you ask for anything commercial, i.e. a Kickstarter or a Patreon or a new book sale or a new t-shirt, before you do any of that in terms of asking for a purchase or support, you have to earn their love. And I think that's part of what the 3 C's, why that works for you, which is the curation and the content are the moments where you say, look at me, I'm Brad Geiger. I'm a giver. I'm giving. Here's some stuff. Hey, look what I'm doing. I'm making your life better on a daily basis by giving you my own things that I created and curating interesting things that I think you might like, right? So to me, that's the balancing act, is it's 2/3 giving people stuff for free and bringing joy to their life, and 1/3 saying, hey, you might want to support me over here with this thing I'm doing. And so if there's too many Kickstarters in the year, that tilts it into commercially heavy communication with the outside world. Whereas if you have, like Brad said, spaced out, I would say about every 6 months, Brad might tighten it up, and especially if it's a smaller project. If they're kickstarting a pin or kickstarting a T-shirt, that could be smaller and tighter together. But I think, largely speaking, if you're kickstarting books or a short film or something like that, I think about 6 months, because you want to earn back hey, I'm not just asking for money. Here's a bunch of free comics you can read. Here's a bunch of curated stuff.
No, that's a really good point. You want to give that. You don't want to dip back to the well that often. And frankly, in terms of monthly crowdfunding, that's what Patreon is for. Kickstarter project by project is good, but if you're doing too many Kickstarters in a row, that's really what Patreon is for, and you might want to think about how you can reconfigure your output to make that work for you.
So let me ask you this, Brad, because this is not in Tyler's question, but is related.
Yeah.
Do you, in your Kickstarters, reference past successes with Kickstarters when you launch a new one?
I don't harp on it, but I'll mention, like at the bottom of that Kickstarter page, where it says, what are the possible problems that could arise. I always say, well, I've done X number of Kickstarters. They've all funded successfully, and I've done this before. I don't know whether I should be promoting that fact more than I already do, which is not much. What's your stance towards that? Mine is I don't really mention it a whole lot. Do you?
No, I think you're right. I tend to put it at the bottom, and it's more of like the here's my Boy Scout badges. Like, hey, I've done this 7 times and I haven't messed up yet, and I've fulfilled all the things that I promised I was going to fulfill. And but it's at the bottom. So if you were really curious, here's all the what do they call them, bona fides or whatever they say in Latin. Where like here I'm a good guy, and here's how you can trust me because I've done this 7 times and all that sort of stuff. But I put it at the bottom.
Yeah.
But part of the reason why I was asking is I think that if you kickstart, every 6 months, 4 months, 7 months, something like that. You will be surprised at how many people completely missed the last Kickstarter that you did, because even though you were talking about it for 30 days, there's a surprisingly large number of people that didn't even hear about it,
Yeah.
So even though you think you're harping on it all the time, and you're like, oh, God, I feel terrible about this. Here I go launching into the Kickstarter. There's a good fifth of your audience is like, wait, what? You Kickstarted a book before? I didn't hear about that Evil Ink book. All right.
Well, that's why I love BackerKit so much, because when that happens, you just direct them right to BackerKit and say, listen, you can add that stuff on. We can still make that work.
Right. No problem at all. Just head right over there.
Yep.
And so anyway, so I think though that even though you feel like you're harping on it, and there will be a percentage of the audience is like, all right, already, there's a large chunk of the population that has you among 400 other people that they follow on social media, and so you are just one drop in the stream that they hear every day, and so they unlike you don't feel like you're harping endlessly.
Absolutely. And listen, I don't think we're going to get any better than a drop in the stream, so it's time for me to say this. You've been listening to Comic Lab, the show about making comics and making a living from comics.
And your hosts have been Brad Geiger, the editor of webcomics.com and cartoonist of Evil Ink at evil-comic.com.
And Dave Kellett. Do-do-do-do-do-do.
Oh, God, that was the saddest thing ever. Oh, a grown man had to do himself. Oh.
He's the co-director of Stripped and the cartoonist of Sheldon at sheldoncomics.com and Drive at drivecomic.com.
And our favorite Comic Lab theme song is used with permission from the very talented Andy Creighton at theworldrecord.net. And this episode and all episodes was edited by Matt Woodard of Woodsong Productions over at www.woodsong.media.
Comic Lab is made possible by your support on patreon.com/comiclab. So we'll go ahead and say that twice. Patreon.com/comiclab.
Geiger, are you doodly yourself? Mom, close the door.
Can I just doodly doot it until I need glasses?